Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. I'm joined, as always, by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing this morning, Scott?
Doing okay. Got the holiday weekend coming up. The primary election's behind us, and so got the holiday weekend. Hopefully, we'll be able to relax and enjoy that. I don't have any plans for it. How about you? You got any plans?
I have plans to not do a whole lot. Maybe hang out with some friends. Actually, I do have a little bit of work to do this weekend. As you may know, my wife and I and a friend of ours run a little cocktail catering side business. If you are a podcast listener who are interested in our services, you can find that at libaciousKnox.com. So we are working a little party on Saturday, but other than that, we're just gonna hang out. And we are here recording on Friday morning, sort of an unusual Friday, especially an unusual Friday before a holiday weekend, in that we have actually had some news, of several actually bits of news come through just this morning, including some quite sad news, which we will get to in a minute. We do have several things to talk about heading into this long weekend. One of the things that just happened this morning, County Commission voted to reorganize itself, as they do every year. There is an interesting controversy in Blount County about the Blount Pride celebration and the state's drag law. We're going to talk about that a little bit. A shakeup in the City of Knoxville administration as Mayor Indya Kincannon prepares to begin a second term. So we've had some people coming and going. We'll talk about that. The Tennessee legislature's special session came to a close this past week. You could insert other verbs there like limped or whimpered or staggered. Anyway, we'll talk about what happened and didn't happen there. But of course, to start out, we did have the primary election in the City of Knoxville mayoral, city council, and municipal judge races this past week. We are going to talk about all of those results, but I think right off the bat, the first thing we have to say is, as I mentioned, this sad news that came through just this morning that one of the candidates for a city council seat, Cameron Brooks, actually passed away overnight.
It was very, very sad news. Brooks had been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma recently. He'd missed a couple of forums and campaign events, and had sent out a press release stating that. Said that his prognosis at the time, he said the prognosis was good. He was getting treatment, everything. He was going to carry on with the campaign. However, his campaign sent out a press release this morning, basically, that said that he had passed away at Fort Sanders Regional Medical Center, and condolences to Wes Knott, who's his husband,
And he was just 45. This was his first run for office. He's been involved in politics in various ways, including as a former chair of the Knox County Democratic Party, but clearly, I think really wanted to get personally involved, and as we'll talk about in the results, was in good shape to be very competitive in the November race. So it's very sad news, and of course, all of our condolences and thoughts to his family and friends.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's been involved. He came to UT. He was from Bristol. He came to UT. Got involved with the United Campus Workers. Was an organizer with them. Was a member of the Knox County Election Commission. Was the head of the Democratic Party. We've been. We've known Cameron for a very, very long time, and he's a fine human being, and he'll be missed by a lot of people.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's talk about these election results. I guess the obvious place to start is at the top of the ticket, where Mayor Kincannon, as just mentioned, did fairly handily win a second term. Yeah,
we've talked about this before. It's been this was kind of the most competitive mayoral incumbent reelection race that we've had lately. We've only had two this century, 2007, 2015. Those involved basically token opposition to Bill Haslam in 2007 and Madeline O'Hara in 2015. This was a little bit more competitive, but really in the end, not a whole lot more. Kincannon swept virtually every precinct in the city. She was strong all over. She ended up getting 57.5% of the vote, which is pretty good. Now, it doesn't. O'Hara got almost 99% of the vote,
but she had only extremely token opposition.
Extremely token. We had this year's primary. Had Jeff Tallman, who ran a fairly decent campaign and did fairly well. He got almost 30% of the vote. The other two candidates that were on the ballot, Constance Every and R.C. Lawhorn, were non-factors, and so there's not a whole lot more to say. I mean, she really there were a couple that Tallman eked out wins in, and one that they tied in, and that was about it. Precincts, that is. And,
right, and in general, he kind of positioned himself as the more, I don't know if conservative, business friendly. He definitely had donations from a lot of Republican donors and that kind of thing, and so you kind of think that 30% maybe represents, kind of some of the more Republican voters in the city, and he tended to do better in more Republican leaning precincts.
That's true. And really, when you look at these numbers, generally speaking, the more conservative candidates got between 30 and 40% of the vote, and the more progressive candidates got 50, 60, 70% of the vote. So that's that analysis is pretty. Although I think Kincannon still had a lot of support from a lot of people who would consider themselves Republican, who probably vote Republican in state and national elections. But that is I'm sure that her administration looks at this as a second term mandate to continue doing what she's been doing.
Sure, and she has had critics through her first term from sort of both the right and the left, but I think what the results of the election show you is that she is pretty much in tune with the, I guess, mainstream political disposition of the city.
Yeah. And she is I think there's a perception that she's working on some systemic things within city government. She's also, I think that the perception is she is trying to do something about housing, which is the number one issue that's emerged over the course of this election. To the extent that government can foster that, and I think that it's also reflective of the fact that crime is down. Mm-hmm. And that was in the middle of her administration. There was a big surge in violent crime. That's abated somewhat, and the hiring of Paul Noel as the new police chief. I think that people are willing to give him, by and large, are willing to give him some time to institute changes at KPD, and I think that by extension they're giving Kincannon a chance to institute changes at KPD and the violence interruption work and all of that to see if that makes further improvements in the crime rate.
Mm-hmm. Well, and she has already taken some steps to kind of prepare herself for that second term, which we will talk about in a couple of minutes. But let's look at the other races on the ballot, because, of course, with Kincannon winning more than 50%, that means she won. That race is over. She is officially reelected. She will not be. There will be no mayoral slot on the ballot in November, but there will be city council races and the municipal judge race. So let's talk about those. Seat A, of course, this is the at-large seat A, is the seat that Cameron Brooks was running for against incumbent Lynn Fugate, and he had a pretty strong showing in the primary.
He did have a strong showing. Fugate got 46% of the vote citywide. Brooks got 43.2%. A very strong showing. One of the things when we looked at the way that voters voted, there is kind of it's not a hard and fast line, but in general, the I-640 bypass is kind of not a boundary, but kind of a permeable border where from to the south of that in North Knoxville, the old parts of North Knoxville, East Knoxville, South Knoxville tend to vote a little bit more toward bit more progressive. They candidates that are perceived to either are progressive or perceived to be progressive do better in those areas. From Fountain City, Inskip, West Knoxville, kind of outside the 640 loop, tended to vote for candidates who are either more conservative or considered more establishment candidates, and that played out in this. Brooks won handily in many of the East and South Knoxville districts or precincts, and Fugate did better in North Knoxville and West Knoxville. One of the things in this race, though, that was also a big factor was Darren Worsham, who didn't even campaign. Nobody knew who he was. He's very, very much an unknown entity. He filed his paperwork. He only did a couple of things campaign-wise. He made an appearance on WBR's political talk show and interviewed, gave us an interview. That's about it. He had family health issues, things like that he didn't want, so he decided not to run at all. He got 10%, more than 10% of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to interpret exactly what that is.
Kind of a none of the above vote.
Maybe. Yeah, it might have been a none of the above vote. Might have been votes from people who don't pay attention a whole lot and thought that he might be related to Earl Worsham, the developer. I don't know. Who knows why? But he got 10% of the vote. He got more votes than other candidates in the election in other races who campaigned vigorously. Mm-hmm. He got more votes than Constance Every in the mayor's race, and he got more votes than R.C. Lawhorn in the mayor's race, and so that was kind of an interesting development. And he's going, course, his votes would have been, you know, you don't know. He's such an unknown that these campaigns will probably be scratching their heads about figuring out how to go after his voters because nobody knew they would be. But as we talked about earlier, now with Cameron Brooks's passing, Lynn Fugate will be the only name on the ballot,
right?
And there's no by state law, his name will not be on the ballot. It's too late for anyone to add their name to the ballot. So it'll be Lynn Fugate alone on the ballot in November. Now, there is a way to wage a write-in campaign. I don't know or think anybody actually will, but September 18th is the deadline. You have to be a certified write-in candidate to have your votes counted.
Right, and I think people sometimes get confused about this because, of course, you can always write in any race, and there's even a line on the ballot for you to do it, and, you get people who write in Bugs Bunny or Marilyn Monroe or whatever. Those votes do not count in the sense that unless you are a certified write-in candidate and you have filed paperwork with the Election Commission to that effect, you could get all of the votes in the world and you would not actually win the seat.
That's true. Our friend Brian Hornback likes to go through and compile lists of the people, real and imaginary, who have received write-in votes. I don't know that he's done. I don't think he's done it yet. During the primary, maybe he will, maybe he won't. It's always kind of a fun thing to look at because, like you said, sometimes it's Bugs Bunny, whoever.
But if you are a certified write-in candidate, which somebody could file by September 18th to be this, you could actually win an election, and that's happened once in city history that I'm aware of, or in relatively recent history. Gary Underwood in South Knoxville back, I think, in the late 1980s, won a race as a write-in candidate. So it is theoretically possible, but somebody would have to take that step of actually, making themselves a certified write-in candidate.
Yeah, and in more recent history, Amelia Parker, who is now the C representative, ran for a district seat in the District 4 seat in 2017, and she tied in the primary. City council broke that tie in favor of the person she tied with. She tied for second, so that person went on to run in the general election on the ballot. She was a certified write-in candidate and did quite well.
Yeah, she got like 20% of the vote or something, which is a lot for a write-in candidate.
Oh yeah. So, but anyway, the passing of Cameron Brooks will have that effect on the ballot, and that either that Fugate will be the only name on the ballot for the seat A race. Period. If there may be a certified write-in effort, there may not be, but that is what we know will be the case. Voters will walk in and see, and in November, either in the early voting period leading up to the November 7th election or the election on the 7th. Her name is on the ballot for that race.
Now, seat B will have two names on the ballot in November, and they are the same two names that were on the ballot in the primary.
Yeah, that's one of the quirks of the city system, is that even if in council races, even if there are just two people on the ballot in the primary is basically the halftime score. You can make that analogy, and I always do, and in this year's primary, Debbie Helsley just absolutely blew R. Bentley Marlowe out of the water. She received close to 70% of the vote, and Marlowe about 30%. She's in many ways appeals to the same voters that that Cameron Brooks appealed to. She's she was a union president. She's been very active in the Democratic Party. She's a neighborhood activist. She's or advocate, and so she appeals to a lot of those same voters. And then Marlowe is a developer who redevelops housing in Mechanicsville neighborhood. He was that the whole idea of addressing the housing issue has been his primary focus, to the exclusion of just about everything else. There'll be a little bit more on him later too, on some other issues, but he lost, or Helsley won virtually all across the board. There was only one district or one precinct where she did not win, and there's a very small, sparsely populated district in North Knoxville, near Whittle Springs, where they tied. There were fewer than 60 votes in the whole precinct, and they tied 29-29. So, other than that, she won. She even won in Mechanicsville, where Marlowe lives and renovates houses, and I think a lot of people have given him a lot of credit for a lot of the turnaround in the Mechanicsville neighborhood. But the people who voted, who live in the Mechanicsville neighborhood, went toward Helsley.
So we probably don't need to say a lot more about that race, because it seems like Helsley's in very strong position heading to November.
She is. Now, those numbers can change.
Sure.
4 years ago, Lynn Fugit was running against Charles Lomax Jr. It wasn't a landslide victory in the primary, but it was a solid victory for Fugit in the primary. Again, it was a 2-person primary. They went on to the general election, and Lomax staged a huge comeback and came within 72, 73 votes of winning. So you can make up ground in the between the primary and the general election. That's a lot of ground to make up, though. That's so it's a real challenge for Marlowe.
So seat C is probably the one that we have talked about the most, because it was this very interesting 3-way race between incumbent Amelia Parker, developer Tim Hill, and Change Center Executive Director Matthew Best. And this is the second election in a row where Parker has been in a 3-way race for that seat, and the second election in a row where she finished first in the primary.
Yeah, she got about 41% of the vote. Again, she did very well in the inside the Beltway, the I-640 Beltway area. Won just about every. She won just about every precinct in East Knoxville and in North Knoxville, all but one, I believe, in South Knoxville. So Tim Hill, who finished second with 37% of the vote, essentially, did much better in North Knoxville and West Knoxville. That pattern played out. Now, the Matthew Best, who I think a lot of people really were attracted to as a candidate. He's young, he's engaging. He ran a good, clean race. People that I've talked to have nothing but positive things to say about him. He got 22% of the vote. So what? As we go in, and he did. Interesting candidate in East Knoxville, where Tim Hill did not do well at all. He did very well. And in West Knoxville precincts, where Tim Hill did very well, and Amelia, he did very well also. So he was, he was the overwhelming number 2 choice in both East Knoxville, the East Knoxville core and the West Knoxville core. So that was kind of interesting dynamic there. The Hill Parker race is going to be very interesting going into the fall. The Parker, first of all, Hill's got a lot of money. He's got over $80,000 still in pocket. He spent probably $150,000 or $100,000 or so, and he has the ability to raise more. And he now that didn't do that wasn't enough alone, obviously, in the primary. So, but we'll see.
Right, he spent a lot of money to finish second in the primary.
Parker's base is passionate. They're active. They vote, and as evidenced here. Now, one thing, Parker does have some weaknesses. She's perceived as very much an anti-Kincannon voice on city council. She often votes
from the left, very much.
From the left, yeah, very much from the left. She often votes against administration proposals, and I think that played into the Best candidacy as well. Best had a lot of support from, especially in the African American community, some of the more establishment leadership folks. Gwen and Sam McKenzie, who are city council member and state representative, respectively. Reverend Harold Middlebrook. Some of the real movers there supported Best. They did not support Parker. They didn't say anything bad about Parker. They just didn't support her. So there's that. But Hill has also got has the I wouldn't say baggage is the right word, but he is a in national and state politics, he's a Republican. He is although he was appointed to planning commission by Madeline Rogero, who is anything but a Republican, and he's got this perception that that he has brought on himself, I guess, is the thing, as being a Republican candidate, which doesn't fly real well in the city, which votes, basically 2/3 to 1/3 Democrat to Republican. So he would have to reach out and get Best voters. I don't know how he's going to do that. There are a lot of people who are progressive who would not vote for Tim Hill for anything because of his support for state and national Republican candidates. But that will be the key to this, is will Hill be able to reach out to Best voters and others who are more progressive and who may be skeptical of his candidacy. He's got to win those over to have any chance at all.
Right. Well, and just on that breakdown of the city, I feel like the city is more, I mean, it's a moving target, but traditionally the city has been sort of more 50 to 55% Democratic. I feel like Joe Biden, I think, got like 58% of the vote in the city. So it's not quite like a 2/3 Democratic breakdown, but also that number does, for the last 20 years, that number has been moving more and more into the Democratic column. And I definitely think it's true. And we see this over and over, that just being identified as a Republican in city races is not very helpful to people.
Well, I think I was using the 2/3, 1/3, and kind of based on this election's kind of shakeout,
right? Because you did have two basically progressive candidates who took about 63% of the vote,
right?
Between the two of them,
and if you add, even in the mayor's race, because you had Kincannon with 57.5%, and Constance Every got, every one of her voters was a progressive, would identify themselves as progressive, and she got 8.1%, so that's 65.6% of the vote there. So, in national elections, it's a little different. State elections, even it can be different because of the way the districts are laid out. But but in this race, I think that generally holds true. Now that I-640 barrier isn't, it's not a hard and fast. It doesn't mean that everybody south of it votes progressive and everybody north and west of it votes, for conservative candidates. That's not the way it works at all. It's more like there are, a 60-40 or 65-45 split, one way or the other on either side. And, and one thing that was really interesting was the Dean Hill, precinct where 1,000 people voted in Dean Hill. I mean, that's 1/16 of the number of people who voted in the city election voted in the Dean Hill precinct of West Knoxville. They overwhelmingly went for Tim Hill. Mm-hmm. His margin was bigger there than Parker's margin over Hill was in any of the other, several of the East Knoxville districts put together. So it was, it's. Well,
and I don't want to be reductive, but that's a quite white and fairly Republican district.
Absolutely.
And so they voted strongly for the white Republican in the race.
They also turn out.
Right, and they also vote very heavily.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big thing is turnout. And really you can make some predictions or projections of what turnout may or may not be. We knew that turnout this year in the primary was going to be higher than it was in 2015 and 2007 when we had the same situation, the same offices, with no incumbent mayor or with an incumbent mayor on the ballot and all. We knew turnout was going to be higher because early voting turnout was higher, and it was. And we also figured it would not be as high as it is when the mayoral seat is open, and that turned out to be the case too. This time it's kind of weird because there will be no mayor's race at the top of the ballot in the general election. That happened in 2007 and 2015 as well. And the weird thing there is in 2007 the turnout went down went up in 2016. Now, one of the
from the primary to the general.
From the primary to the general. One of the big things about that though is when you look at competitive races, because that really seems to be the key. There was in at least 2007 there was one city council race that was competitive on the ballot. The others were unopposed, and so you had the entire city voting for one city council in one city council race, essentially. We also didn't have the judges race on the ballot, which we'll be talking about next. But so turnout, could be around the same or a little bit better, and it could fall off. We just don't know because the history is not real definitive on kind of how that works. Well,
and I also, and of course this would probably just be a marginal impact, but who knows the effect of Cameron Brooks's death. On the one hand, that means unless there is a certified write-in, that means there will be one fewer contested races. On the other hand, and we've certainly seen an outpouring on social media this morning from people very sad about Cameron Brooks and wanting to kind of continue his work and so forth. It could lead to some determination, for people who wanted to vote for him to say, well, I'm going to go. For more progressive voters to say, well, I am going to go and vote in November, sort of, in his memory or honor or whatever. Yeah. So it's always very hard to know what kind of impact those things will have. I think the one interesting thing about the seat C race is that, that 22% of voters for Best are obviously the people who both of the other candidates, Parker and Hill, would want to appeal to. And on paper, you would probably look at it and say, well, it seems most likely that those voters would go to Parker because, Best was basically progressive. He was an African-American candidate, as Parker is. And if you look at where Best did well, especially running second in a lot of the East Knoxville precincts, those are precincts that Parker did very well in also. So you would think that that's where those votes would go. On the other hand, those are progressive voters who decided not to vote for Parker, which registers some level of dissatisfaction or discomfort with Parker because she is kind of the most, progressive, the most left member of city council and is often at odds with the administration. And so where those voters go is a little bit unpredictable.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned earlier, Tim Hill, that's his only path really to win. I mean, he's got enough money to reach whoever he wants to reach. At some point you spend, it's all you can spend. There are only so many Tim Hill commercials he's going to buy. There are only so many mailers you send out. But going and trying to get, appeal to the more progressive voters who are not satisfied with or uncomfortable with Parker's stance on her opposition to the Kincannon administration, because you got to remember Kincannon's progressive as well. I mean, it's not like Kincannon's some right wing person that progressives hate. Obviously not. Almost 60% of the city voted for her, and and those are the people that Hill will have to reach out to if he's going to have a chance.
Well, I think that one thing we can definitely say is nobody should underestimate Amelia Parker at the ballot box. We've seen this in election after election.
No, absolutely not. As we said in 2017, she actually was a certified write-in candidate who did very well. Got a fifth of the votes. And her name wasn't even on the ballot. 4 years ago, she was outspent. She had a good candidate who was running against her, Amy Midas, and she won. And so it's you underestimate Amelia Parker at your own peril.
Yep. Well, let's talk about the judges' race. The first time ever, this was Judge John Rawson, the incumbent, who's held that seat since the mid-1980s. This is his 10th campaign.
Yes.
And the first time out of 10 times that he is going to have to actually run against an opponent in the general election.
Yeah. Even the first time he ran as an incumbent because he had been appointed. But his first election in 1987, he won in the primary. He won in primary in 2003. The only other time he's actually challenged at all, he easily won in the primary then. This is the first time since then. It's been 20 years. First time he's been challenged, and it's a formidable challenge. He had four opponents running against him.
Three.
I'm sorry, three running against him. It was a 4-person race, and he finished first. He was 37.65%. But Tyler Cavanis, who's an local attorney, all these are challengers or attorneys. You have to be an attorney to be the city judge. Got 36.2%. So it was very close. Only 228 votes separated them, and they're the top two finishers. Cavanis obviously is going on to the general election, as well as Rawson. Cavanis, again, this is kind of played out this way. He seemed to attract a lot of the more progressive, or did well in the precincts where progressive candidates tended to do well. And Rawson did well in the areas where traditional candidates had tended to do well. So that held. That said, we had Andrew Beamer and Mary Ward, who were the other two candidates in that race. and they got 26% of the vote
between the two of
them.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of people who did not vote for either candidate, and Rawson and Cavanis are going to have to reach out and try to figure out who they are, because it's not as easy in the judges' race to figure out ideology, because there aren't these kind of public policy things where you can say, oh, that candidate is against raising taxes in any circumstance. This person's for raising taxes. This person's against this, or that person's against that. Judges' races don't really work that way. Basically, it's they can only talk really about administrative matters of the court, which means
their own qualifications, basically,
and their own qualifications. So, and so you don't, it's going to take some work to figure out where those voters who were Beamer and Ward supporters, where they were, and how to reach them and try to get their voters. So that's going to be really interesting to look at. Rawson has been, he's more than twice Cavanis's age. In fact, he's been a judge longer than Cavanis has been alive.
Right.
So.
Rawson is 75. He's been a judge for 36, going on 37 years. And Cavanis is 31. Cavanis is just barely old enough to even run for the office, because you have to be 30.
Yeah. So that's, Rawson obviously, says, hey, I've got so much experience, and, that's why you should return me. And judges benefit from experience on the bench. They've seen everything. They know how to do things. And his age is kind of one of those issues that no one overtly talked about. None of the candidates anyway, but there was kind of a backdoor way to.
Well, they didn't talk about his age, but they did say that they think it's time. I mean, basically what the three challengers said was, we think Rawson's done a very good job, and it's time. He's done it for long enough, basically.
Yeah, it's time for new ideas.
Right.
New ideas could be easily translated into old incumbent, but Rawson said, I've been keeping up with things and updating the office and with technology and stuff like that. They, and Cavanis, more so than the other two, to a greater extent. But I mean, when you look at it, you've got 42% of the people who voted in that race voted for someone who advocated for new ideas and fresh eyes.
62%.
Yes, 62%. Excuse me.
Right. Almost 2/3.
Yeah.
And I think if you're Rawson, what Rawson actually said was, well, I was up against three very strong candidates. I'm happy to have finished first in the primary, which is true. But you can certainly look at that and say that if you are the incumbent, you're the one in the race who everybody already knows. Everybody already knows your name. Most of us had never heard of these other people until they started running for office.
Even the Bar Association, remember, they don't endorse candidates, but they do a survey of their members. The respondents to their survey, more than half of the respondents for the other three candidates all said, we don't know enough. I don't know enough about that candidate to make a recommendation one way or another.
Right. And that's doubly or triply true of just your average voter who's not an attorney.
Yeah,
they doesn't know who these lawyers are.
Yeah. I mean, they run into each other, with city county building.
So I think that for an incumbent in that situation, I wouldn't imagine that it's very heartening to get 37% of the vote, even if it was more than the other three, because of exactly that. That means that the majority of people who voted chose to vote for somebody who was not the incumbent, who they probably do know and whose name they are familiar with. And the other factor here, as you say, it's certainly not a partisan race, and it's not an ideological race. And yet, I think that Cavanis has done a pretty good job, and to some degree the other two challengers did too, of signaling in various ways that they are kind of generally progressive. Not so much by way of contrasting themselves with Rawson, as I think just appealing to what they perceive as a more progressive electoral base, but also Rawson has kind of been dogged by this perception that he is maybe more conservative, maybe a Republican. He did make some introductions at a campaign event for Donald Trump back in 2015. That there's a photo of him with Trump that, is in wide circulation on social media. And just looking again at the city voting base as a whole, like, that's not the kind of thing that's going to help you.
Yeah, it's not, and it's kind of funny. We in this, in our analyses of this and our reporting on this, we do refer to some candidates who are more progressive than others, some who are more conservative than others, some who have been do better in precincts where the Democrats are stronger and Republicans are stronger, and the city election is a nonpartisan race, but the electorate is one of the things is the electorate appears to be putting a greater emphasis on that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the candidates for city council this year complained to me that they have been going. They would go to someone's door to knock on their door and talk about city issues, and all the person wanted to know was whether they were Republican or Democrat.
Yeah,
and and to people who take the nonpartisan part of city elections seriously, that can be very frustrating because they want to talk about parks, they want to talk about roads, they want to talk about public safety, and the voter only wants to know whether they're a Democrat or Republican, and they don't really care, or at least don't tell them they care about these other local issues. So that can be very frustrating. But a lot of that is, that's where the electorate has gone in the last.
We really have seen a nationalization of politics, and we talked about this with the school board races this past year becoming partisan.
Mm-hmm.
For example, that is not only true in Knoxville. Obviously, it seems to be increasingly true across the board. And as you say, in nonpartisan races, that can make it sort of difficult for people who maybe don't really want to identify one way or the other, or don't think it's particularly relevant to the office, but it is relevant for voters.
Yes, yeah. I mean, sometimes voters, don't pay attention to local politics as much, so they want some shorthand. Don't talk to me about how much money the city spends on parks versus how much they spend on this or that or the other, whatever those issues are. Don't tell me, just tell me if you're Republican or Democrat, and I'll vote one way or the other. I don't have to think about it that way.
Right.
And that's where a lot of people are.
Yep. Well, obviously we will have much more to talk about with the city races, the ones that remain over the next couple of months. We're just when does early voting in that start? Like early October sometime?
Yeah, sometime it would be mid-October.
Yeah. So we're
I don't have
probably about 6 weeks out before we start another cycle of voting.
Yeah, we've got about 10 weeks before the election itself. The early voting period's a 2-week period, so right before election day. So basically 7 weeks or so to before early voting starts. So.
All right. Well, let's talk about a couple of other things. The Tennessee State Legislature's special session wrapped up this past week. They, Governor Bill Lee, who called this session, was basically invisible throughout it. It lasted just about a week. And he just kind of seemingly kept his distance, at least publicly. There were reports that privately he was in conversation with, Republican state legislative leaders, but he was not very visible or vocal. He came after the session ended. He came out and released a video that you can find on the governor's website where he's just kind of standing at a podium in front of a blank wall, looking a little bit lonely, I thought, where he tried to kind of spin the whole thing like it had been a big success, and we did pass a couple of bills, and they did pass a couple of bills. They passed a bill that will require the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to make an annual report on human trafficking in the state. They passed some additional funding for state mental health workers and programs. They did not pass anything having to do with firearms regulation. And of course, that was really the issue that there was a lot of public clamoring for after the Covenant school shootings in March. That was really the issue that drove Lee back in April to say he was going to call this special session, because he was frustrated that the legislature adjourned in the spring without even discussing a proposal he had put forth for kind of a version of a red flag law, a temporary mental health order of protection, where somebody who is identified by a judge as being a threat to themselves or others can have their access to firearms restricted. There was a proposed bill along those lines in this special session, which, even though that had been proposed and supported by the Republican governor, the only person who would submit that bill for passage was a Democratic legislator, and it died in committee for lack of a second. There was not even any discussion. That was it. And mostly, so Lee kind of tried to put, I guess, the best face possible that you could on this. But if you actually go back and look at, like, if you weren't paying attention to the special session as it happened, if you go back and look at the coverage of it from day to day, what you see are a lot of words like chaos, rancor. It was a very tumultuous session where there was much more time spent arguing, fighting, demonstrating, and litigating over the actual rules of conduct of the session than there was substantive discussion of issues. The Republicans, right at the start of the session, the Republicans in the House adopted a very strict set of rules of conduct, clearly trying to avoid a repeat of what they had in the spring, with galleries full of angry people and the rotunda full of angry crowds and so forth. And also they put in some strict regulations on what members of the audience could do, including holding signs. They put strict regulations on allowing any legislator to go off topic, and saying that if any legislator went off topic, they could be ruled out of order and actually be silenced and not allowed to speak on the floor of the House. The ban on signs got them in trouble at Chancery Court in Nashville, because the second day of the session, there were 3 women who were expelled from a committee hearing for quietly holding 8.5 by 11 signs in their seats. And they promptly, with the help of the ACLU, promptly filed suit saying this was a violation of First Amendment rights. And a Nashville judge, a chancellor, ruled that it probably was a violation, and she put an injunction against that rule. The House Speaker, Cameron Sexton, rather than accepting that ruling, filed an appeal of it. And so then there was another court hearing on it on this past Monday, and the chancellor again came back and said, yes, I mean what I said. This is probably unconstitutional. You can't do this. And so there is still going to be further court action on that case, because that rule that they adopted was for the special session, but it would also be in effect when they come back into regular session in January. And so this question about whether people are going to be allowed to hold signs in the gallery is something that is still apparently going to be litigated. But for the purposes of this session, at least, they were allowed to hold signs for the rest of it. But that rule about going off topic, they did apply that to one legislator and silenced him for a day. And do you know who that legislator was?
Oh, yes.
Is it a Justin?
Jones.
It was a Justin. It was Representative Justin Jones, who, of course, was one of the Tennessee Three. He and Justin Pearson had been expelled by the House back in April, and then were promptly reappointed on an interim basis to their seats, and then were reelected again to their seats in special elections. Pearson was actually literally sworn into office again for the 3rd time this year at the start of the special session. And yet here we go again with Justin Jones being silenced on the floor of the House with 70 Republicans, very reminiscent of those expulsion votes, 70 Republicans voting to silence him. He walked off the floor in protest. Members of the public who were in the gallery started chanting in protest to Jones being silenced, calling the House Republican majority fascists and racists and so forth. Chanting from the gallery is also a violation of the House rules. So then they all got thrown out, escorted out by state troopers. And then the rest of the Democrats who were on the floor of the House in protest of both Jones being silenced and the public being thrown out, they all walked out too. And, of course, the House Republicans kind of then, carried on trying to pass some bills. Although by that point, the bills they were passing couldn't be considered anyway because the Senate had already wrapped up its business and said, we don't want to do this anymore. We want to go home. We're not going to consider any more bills. So the House was fighting with the Senate. The governor was absent. I mean, Sam Stockard, who's a veteran State House reporter who now writes for the Tennessee Lookout, he was kind of tweeting all this in real time. And there was one point when everybody either walked out or got thrown out of the chamber. He put out a one-word tweet that just said, chaos. And Scott, I mean, I understand Governor Lee, kind of trying to take whatever he could get out of this session that he himself called and say, look, we got together, we did these couple of things that'll be good for the state. But, it's kind of a stretch to call this anything other than sort of a debacle.
Yeah, one of the things is the things that were passed are things that, could easily have been handled in the regular session.
Right.
So as a special session of the legislature, as far as the legislation goes, it was anything but special. It was mundane at best. As political theater, it was absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah.
It was just absolutely and these things are called extraordinary special sessions. So the special part, no. The extraordinary part, yes.
Yeah.
And
it made a lot of headlines, just not ones that I think the governor or really probably the Republican supermajority wanted.
Yeah, one of the things is in this whole mess is that there was a groundswell after the Covenant shooting. The state of Tennessee needs to do something to, and a lot of it had to do with firearms. Now, would this Tennessee legislature, or obviously not, but was things like a something like a assault weapons ban be on the table? No, but something that would actually address violence was expected, and that the legislature didn't deliver. And so, when I don't know, I mean, these things tend to, there's always a lot of support and talk after a tragedy. They tend to subside somewhat. This one hasn't.
Yeah,
and I don't know if it will. When the legislature convenes in regular session in January, how much carryover there will be there. I would imagine that at this point there will be at least some, and especially the way that the special session turned out, because as Stockard said, chaos is exactly what it was.
Well, right, and I think it does set us up for probably a fairly combative regular session when they come back in January, not least because it's going to be an election year, so there's going to be a lot of posturing on all sides, no doubt.
And then because it's an election year, much like the Senate in the special session, they'll want to hurry up and go home because they can't raise legislators can't raise campaign funds while they're in session. So this may be the shortest legislative session in Tennessee history.
Well, and I think Speaker Cameron Sexton has clearly shown with the special session that his response to all of the negative attention that they got from the Tennessee 3, the expulsion hearings and everything, has not been to sort of back off of this very kind of, tough guy, bad cop approach to managing the House, but has been to kind of double down and crack down with these increasingly strict rules. And the Republican supermajority especially is going to want to get out of session as quickly as possible in the next session. And so I think we'll probably see some continued very, strong management, muscular management of House affairs by the House supermajority, and they can do that because they are a supermajority. They can pretty much call all the shots.
Yeah.
So, and those Covenant School parents who have gotten involved, they had a press conference the last day of the special session. They have T-shirts, they have logos. These are the things that tell you that like a movement is not going anywhere. They've invested in some graphic design and so forth. And they had a press conference just literally saying, we are not going away. We are going to be back. We are going to keep it up. So, yes, we will see. But certainly the special session did not appear to assuage or appease or probably satisfy much of anybody. Okay. The day after the city primary, newly reelected Mayor Indya Kincannon immediately came out with some announcements about her administration going forward. And what have we heard about that?
Yeah, it's the second term shakeup, and there's been a lot of movement there. Kind of triggered at first by Aaron Gill, who's been the chief policy officer and deputy to the mayor, taking a new job at Knoxville Utilities Board. She's going to be KUB's new vice president of sustainability and government relations. Now, she was the head of the city's sustainability office for a long time. She's very passionate about the environment and about sustainability measures, and so it's kind of, she had a much broader list of responsibilities at the city. This is so she'll be focused more on something that is her, as she told me, it was her passion to do that, and so she's moving there, which opens up all kinds of things in city government, and what they're going to reorganize a little bit too. David Brace, who's the chief operating officer, who's the basically Gill and Brace were the top two advisors to the mayor. Brace is going to become the newly created chief of staff. He's not going to have management responsibilities. People aren't going to be reporting to him, but he's going to be working with the mayor on kind of big picture things and strategies moving forward in the second term. He's been in city government for close to 30 years, so he's very in various capacities, and so he's going to be the chief of staff. Then we've got all kinds of other things going on. Grant Rosenberg will be the new chief operating officer replacing Brace. He comes from Denark Construction, where he's been a vice president there. He's got government experience as well. He worked in former Knox County government or Knox County Mayor Mike Ragsdale's administration. He was in the head of the Office of Neighborhoods there, and he was probably good for Kincannon. He was unscathed in any of the spending scandals that went on with the Ragsdale administration. Wasn't involved in any of those, so he's going to be the chief operating officer. He's going to be in charge of things like finance and public service and those kinds of nuts and bolts government functions that Brace had been in charge of. To replace Gill, they're going to promote Cheryl Ball, who's been the deputy policy director. She's a little less well known among people who aren't real familiar with city government. She's got private sector experience. She's got public sector experience. She's been Gill's deputy all along. She has been very involved in their housing initiatives. She's going to be and that's the housing and neighborhood offices. The offices that deal with those that report to her will be reporting to her. Rebecca Jane Justice, who was she was the deputy development director. Harold Cannon he'd previously retired, and they hadn't filled that job yet. Rebecca Jane Justice is going to take that position, and she's going to be the development director, but it's also added urban planner to her title, so she's going to be an urban planner and or urban design and development officer there. So a lot of shakeups at the top. I think that some of it's promoting people who've done, who've worked in the city all along or has worked for the Kincannon administration at least, and then bringing in some new blood. So with Rosenberg.
Yeah, and this is a pretty common thing for a second-term executive to have a lot of people depart. I mean, I think, it would be possible to look at this and go, whoa, she just got reelected and everybody's leaving or everybody's moving around or whatever. Yeah. But, I think like if you look at the timing of the Erin Gill announcement, for example, she's starting at KUB in a couple of weeks. Yeah. The most likely thing is that she's been in talks for that job and there was an agreement to say, well, let's at least wait until after the primary because, people are usually kind of politically set. When you're running for reelection, you don't want the perception of a lot of turmoil as you're running. And so a lot of times it is kind of a natural time. People have been there for 4 years, or in Erin Gill's case, because she started under Mayor Rohero, so she's been with the city for quite a while.
Yeah, longer than a decade. I'm not sure exactly the first year she was hired off the top of my head.
But it is a pretty normal sequence of events. One thing I wanted to mention, though, with the hiring of Grant Rosenberg, because Grant Rosenberg also ran for county commission 4 years ago, in 2020, as a Republican for the 2nd District seat. He lost to Courtney Durrett. And it is, I think, you will hear people sometimes be very cynical about the idea of nonpartisan government. And people will kind of sneer at it and say, well, it's not really nonpartisan. Everybody knows if somebody is a Republican or a Democrat and so forth. And to a certain degree, that's true. We were talking about that in the election. It does often factor into voters thinking whether, even if the person doesn't have a party label, they still kind of want to classify them that way. But I do think, and I think this holds up if you kind of look historically, that one thing that having a nonpartisan administration allows you to do is it gives you more flexibility in who you can bring in. And so Grant Rosenberg, I think, ran as basically a moderate Republican in 2020, but he is, and he worked for Mike Ragsdale, also a Republican. But he's being hired by a mayor who we know is a Democrat, is a progressive Democrat. And I cannot think of similar situations on the county side where all of the offices are explicitly partisan. It would be not unheard of, but unusual for a county mayor who was a Republican, say, to hire somebody to a top office, because Rosenberg's being hired in he's going to be the COO.
He's going to be reporting to the mayor.
Exactly. To hire somebody in who had just run as a Democrat 3 years ago, if a county Republican mayor did that, he would get a tremendous amount of pushback from the county Republican Party, because when you have explicitly partisan offices, there is kind of an assumption that everybody who's there is either part of the party or is at least in tune with it, not out there openly running against it, basically. Yeah. Similarly, when I worked at the city, my former boss, Mayor Rohero, she had 2 chief operating officers who were Republicans, Eddie Manis, who then ran and served as a Republican in the state legislature, Christy Branscombe, who is currently Governor Bill Lee's commissioner of, I forget her exact title. It's
General Services.
General Services, right? Exactly. Obviously, she's a Republican. She had a very high office there. Mayor Rohero worked for former Mayor Bill Haslam, who was a Republican. He knew she was a Democrat. She had run against him in 2003, but he hired her in. And so I think that when people get sort of overly cynical about does nonpartisan government really make any difference, I think it does.
Yeah, I mean, that was one I was going to bring. I'm glad you brought up Rohero and Haslam and Manis and Branscombe with Rohero, because I was going to bring that up too. Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of a traditional almost thing for mayors to reach across to someone who might be ideologically. Now, granted, all of those are, I mean, Manis and Branscombe are both kind of moderate Republican types. Rohero is kind of, she's a little bit more further along progressive, but she was also very pragmatic, and so I mean, it's kind of a left and right center kind of phenomenon there. But I think it serves well. I mean, one of the things that if you're going to be and this is one of the problems that the state legislature is running into. If you're in charge of if you're an elected official, you've got constituents of both parties. Your constituents might outnumber their constituents, but you still got a bunch of constituents who are of the other persuasion. And it would help to have somebody who can tell you what they're thinking and what they want to inform you about your decision making. And that's exactly what these the mayors in Knoxville have done, is they've had somebody on board who is not necessarily in lockstep with them ideologically, to help them, for if nothing else, understand the sentiment of people who are ideologically different.
Yeah, and well, having served in an administration that had people of both parties who, and also there were people I worked with at the city who I honestly didn't know personal politics. Yeah. And I know sometimes people find that hard to believe, because doesn't everybody know? But not necessarily. There's a lot of, when you're running a city government, a lot of the more ideological stuff doesn't really come up that often. But I do think, I always felt like there was value to having a diversity of voices around the table, including ideological diversity and a nonpartisan. Of course, you can do that if you're in a partisan situation, but it's a lot easier to do it in a nonpartisan situation. Presumably, I don't know this for a fact, but probably Kincannon is not going to get an angry call from Matt Shears at the Knox County Democratic Party saying, "How can you hire a Republican?" Whereas I think if Glenn Jacobs hired a Democrat into a top position, he probably would get that phone call.
I think you're probably right.
Okay, I wanted to mention something that this is a little hard for us to talk about timing-wise, because we're recording this on Friday. On Saturday, there is a Blount Pride is having its annual LGBTQ Pride Festival in Maryville, on the campus of Maryville College. And then this is going to be, the podcast will be released on Sunday. So by the time this comes out, whatever happens on Saturday will have happened. We don't know what that's going to be. And in fact, it's possible that there's something that's going to happen today, judicially, that will affect this issue. So all we can kind of do is set it up, and then maybe we can come back next week and talk about what actually happened. But I think it's very interesting, because basically Blount Pride is having its Pride Festival. Blount County, over the past few years in particular, has become a little bit of a hotbed of certain kinds of far-right activism. We've had Proud Boys and white supremacists showing up to demonstrate outside various events, especially events having to do with the LGBTQ community. And there's been sort of a growing visibility for the LGBTQ community in Blount County and in Maryville, as there has been in Knox County and lots of other places, and then some growing pushback against that. And this Pride Festival does have scheduled, as part of its roster of entertainment, various drag performances. There is a drag queen story time, where a drag queen will be reading or telling children's stories. There is just a drag review performance, and then there's actually a drag performer. Interestingly, a Christian drag singer who goes by the name of Flamey Grant, but who sings actually sincerely devotional music, and through a weird series of circumstances recently had the number one song on the iTunes Christian chart was by Flamey Grant about a month ago. And so Flamey Grant is also performing. The actual person's name is Matthew Lovelock. He performs as Flamey Grant. And the Blount County District Attorney, Ryan Desmond, who's new in office, he was just elected last year, sent a letter just a few days before the festival is to take place to the organizers and also to all local law enforcement officials, Blount County Sheriff's Office, Maryville Police Department, basically saying, well, the state passed this anti-drag bill that we have talked about here several times, and I'm going to enforce this law. And The law is a little bit vague. It kind of inherently classifies anybody performing in drag as an adult cabaret performer, and then it kind of applies the legal prohibitions that are generally used against, strip shows with nudity and sexual explicit behavior in them, kind of applying that to drag shows. And it kind of says it's only drag shows that are sexually explicit, but it doesn't really define any of these terms, and it leaves open the impression that kind of anybody performing a drag show in a public area where it could be seen by minors, by anybody under 18, could be violating this law. Now, this law has been challenged in court, and a Memphis judge in June ruled that it was probably unconstitutional and put an injunction against it being enforced. However, because that case was only in Memphis, it was brought by a Memphis theatrical troupe, and it named the Memphis district attorney as its actual defendant. Technically, that ruling only applies in Shelby County, even though it is a ruling by a federal judge about a state law. And State Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti at that point came out and said, well, I believe this is still in effect in the rest of the state, and so Skrmetti has appealed that Memphis ruling to the Sixth Circuit, and in the meantime, he has just kind of sent the message that, as far as I'm concerned, this is still in effect in the rest of the state, which is what Ryan Desmond, the DA in Blount County, has picked up on in sending this letter. And so just Thursday of this week, as all this kind of blew up, Blount Pride and Flamey Grant, Matthew Lovelock, with the help of the ACLU of Tennessee and a whole raft of civil rights attorneys, filed a lawsuit, sort of a preemptive lawsuit against Desmond, and they want a federal judge to tell Desmond that he can't enforce this law, and that, in fact, if, their argument is that, look, the Shelby County District Attorney and the Blount County District Attorney are both basically officers of the state. They are the representatives of the state in any violations of state law, and therefore, and what's being challenged here is a statewide law. And so basically, if it's illegal, if it's unconstitutional for this law to be enforced by the Shelby County DA, it's also unconstitutional for it to be enforced by the Blount County DA. We don't know what... There's an assumption, and it could be out right now because we're taping the podcast and I can't get online and look. There's an assumption that there will be a ruling of some sort on that today, on Friday, because this event is supposed to take place on Saturday. But we don't know what's actually going to come out of that. But again, I think it just illustrates when this drag bill was being discussed, there were a lot of people who said this is, especially advocates for LGBTQ rights, who said this bill is really an attack on LGBTQ people and culture broadly. And people who were proposing the law and advocating for it in legislature basically said, no. This, and Jack Johnson, the state senator who sponsored it, said this not at all anti-LGBTQ. He was offended that people would think this was anti-LGBTQ and that this is about protecting children from sexual obscenity. And yet here we are, even 3 months after the bill has been found unconstitutional by one federal judge. Here we are with the largest LGBTQ cultural gathering in Blount County every year being under direct threat of prosecution by the Blount County DA. So I think it just illustrates sort of what's really always been going on with this law.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you put it that way, where you're basically saying this one gathering is being targeted, and it is. I mean, I think it's very easy to see that, and we don't have to go through all the arguments back and forth, but I think it's one of the things that the DA in Blount County has invited this lawsuit, because he could have just said, okay, even I mean, this doesn't sound good either, but he could have just said, okay, well, we'll sit back and watch, and if anything happens, he doesn't have to make any pronouncements, doesn't have to say he's going after anybody. Just if there's a problem,
which is the more traditional position for district attorneys to take.
Yeah, then I mean that's in anything. I mean you don't make preemptive discussions about arrests that you might or might not make. You watch out, and if something happens, then you take action. If it doesn't, you don't. So,
right. It's hard not to see it as a bit of a political move by the district attorney.
It's almost impossible. But and of course, there, as you said, there could be a judicial ruling on this that came out on Friday that we, because of timing, we're not going to be able to talk about. Whatever happens, we really can't talk about. Can't speak to it because it's happening, in the future for us, in the past to the listeners. So, it's one of a weird time.
It is, yeah.
It's a
little bit of time traveling on this podcast. Yeah. Well, we will come back next week and talk about whatever happened there, but it's very interesting to have this blowing up. The first sort of effort that I'm aware of statewide for somebody to really say, yes, I'm going to enforce this law aggressively, and it's right next door to us. Yeah,
most DAs, I think, at least, especially in areas where there's significant population. Blount County isn't, urban the way that Knox County is. It's still, a fairly populous county. Most DAs are kind of like, well, I'm going to focus on violent crime and serious crime.
Right. If somebody brings a charge,
if something happens, we'll take care of it. But we've got people, drug trafficking and gun violence and things like that are much more. That's what's going to get my attention.
And that's been the position of the Knox County District Attorney General Sharm Allen on all of these kind of controversial laws, the abortion laws, the transgender medical care laws, the drag bill. We've asked her office about all of those, and their response to all of them is the same, which is that, if anything's brought to us by local law enforcement, we will look at it, but we are focused on the issues that are of greatest concern to us. So I also just wanted to mention very quickly the last little bit of news that happened this Friday morning. Knox County Commission held its annual reorganization meeting. They did it early in the morning, I think because everybody wanted to get out of town for the long weekend. No fireworks. We may remember last year, in a surprise move, the new female majority of Knox County Commission, because it's now 6 women and 5 men on commission, elected one of their own as chair, and they elected, this was last year, they elected Courtney Durrett as chair, who's one of the 2 Democrats on commission, and it caused quite a bit of to-do and surprise that 4 Republican women on commission would vote for a Democrat. This and they voted last year. Commissioner Terry Hill was elected as vice chair, and she said at the time that she was interested in serving as chair in the future. So this year, when it came around, there was some discussion at last week's commission meeting where Commissioner John Schoonmaker just kind of asked, "Hey, who's interested in being chair this year?" And Terry Hill said, "I am interested in being chair." Now, at that time, at that meeting, Durrett also said, "Well, I would be interested in serving a second term." Now, that seemed like it. Durrett only got elected chair the first time with the support of Terry Hill and the other Republican women on commission. And so with Terry Hill saying she wanted to run, it seemed like that might be a difficult path for Durrett to get a second year. It was unusual enough that she got the first year. And in fact, what happened when they got together Friday morning was Durrett herself nominated Terry Hill for the position. And so Terry Hill will be the new chair of county commission with no fireworks, no fuss.
Who says that there can't be bipartisan cooperation on county government? So.
Exactly. There is a little bit of bipartisanship right there. Commissioner Gina Oster, also a Republican, is elected as the new vice chair. And then they also reorganized and named all of their various committee members and everything. And I'm not going to say anything about that because I don't think anybody's very interested in it. But the only actual news here was that there wasn't any news, and that's the most common thing when we have these kinds of chair votes. Last year was unusual in that it actually surprised everybody. All right, Seth, why don't we take a little break here and we'll come back and do a Q&A. Okay, we are to the Q&A part of the podcast. Every week we go into the Compass Colloquy, our subscriber-only Facebook group, which you can join if you're a Compass subscriber, which you can become at CompassKnox.com. And we ask our readers if there's anything they would like to hear about on the podcast beyond the obvious headlines. We got a couple of questions this week having to do with historic structures that are threatened with potential imminent demise, the Pryor Brown Garage downtown and the Sturkey House out on Magnolia Avenue. Scott, what's going on with these?
Well, demolition permits are active and have been pulled, but no demolition has been started yet on either property. We'll start first with the Pryor Brown Garage on Gay Street. It's on a surface. Otherwise, it's the block it's on is a surface parking lot. The garage dates back to the late 1920s. It is dilapidated. I don't know, it continues to deteriorate. I don't, and this, there's idea was to tear it down and to redevelop the block. Now, the Ethant Group, and Mike Conley were talking about what to do with it. Apparently, Conley owns the property. The Ethant Group has been buying up downtown properties with the idea of building new or renovating properties. They haven't made a lot. They bought a lot of property and made very little progress. So, of course, we had the COVID-19 effect on construction costs and things like that. So it's not surprising, not stunning that they haven't been as aggressive in building as they have been in buying. But nonetheless, this there was going to be some kind of project. There was going to be some kind of announcement at some point about what they and Conley were planning to do with this property. That is not materialized. Scuttlebutt kind of basically is that maybe there's some difficulty there. Don't know really what's going on. Nothing's been announced. Nothing's really been moving on that. They have to submit a street closure plan to do this, because you don't have to close some streets when they actually demolish the garage. So that has that'll kind of be a tip off that they're going to actually be doing it. But nothing's gone on there yet. The Sturkey House, as we talked before, that was the historic house on Magnolia Avenue, where the state was going to move its probation and parole office. A developer from Jellicoe was going to initially was going to renovate the building and add to it and put an office there. Then local. Then there was a fire at the historic house, which dates back to the 1920s, like Pryor Brown Garage, and was originally owned by one of the Sturkey brothers of Sturkey furniture fame. But it caught on fire. The owner of the property said it's too far damaged, not going to be able to save it. I'm going to demolish it. He got a demolition permit. The state, the state had already awarded the deal to this developer to build this. One of the things was the initial proposal included renovating the historic structure. Then, obviously, demolishing it would remove that as part of the plan. Historic preservationists locally were, obviously upset about the possible demolition of a historic building, especially along Magnolia, which used to have lots of stately homes and other buildings, and very few of them are left. And then local officials, state rep Sam McKenzie was one, who weren't really kept in the loop about this from the state. And this is a very prominent intersection. It's a probation and parole office on one of the most prominent intersections on Magnolia Avenue, which is dead set in the middle of a portion of the city that has been plagued and beset by violence. So the optics weren't optimal. So they the state, because it was originally they were going to save the building, the Sturkey House had decided they pulled out of it. Well, the demolition permit still stands; it's still valid. The house hasn't come down yet, though, and one of there is at least one interested party negotiating with the owner to buy it and save the house and do some other redevelopment on the site. That is not, nothing's been announced, but the building hasn't come down either. So apparently that's still under discussion. There's still, my understanding is they're still doing their due diligence on it, and we should find out soon. But but we've got two historic buildings that are that can be demolished at just about any time, and so far, efforts on one are ongoing to save it. On the other, the Pryor Brown building, it is just stalled.
Right, and there don't seem to be any efforts to save the Pryor Brown garage anymore. I mean, there was a big push 6-7 years ago where a developer actually, announced an effort to redevelop it, and then ended up in crosswise with Mike Conley, the owner of it, as you mentioned, and that didn't go anywhere, and it's continued to deteriorate. And I certainly don't hear anything anymore about anyone. It seems like what still ain't anything happening there maybe is this broader negotiation over the whole property and block between Conley and the EFAN group, but there doesn't seem to be any real activity around saving Pryor Brown, but there is still a very active effort to save the Sturkey House.
Yeah, and one thing about the Pryor Brown issue is that the city it stepped in and did this during the O'Hara administration. If they tear down the Pryor Brown garage, it can't become the land underneath it can't become part of the surface parking lot that is covering the rest of the block. So there has to be something that goes in there. So there, whether it's Conley, whether he sells it, whatever happens there, something has to be done with at least that footprint of the of the building, and obviously doing something with the entire block. I mean, this is a full city block that is essentially sitting empty at a time when real estate is at a premium all over the place. It's just kind of mind-boggling that it's still there, but it's certainly ripe for development. And I think that I and many others who have looked at watched things going on downtown over the years are still scratching our heads at the fact that it's not been developed.
Right, because we have seen a lot of other, downtown had a lot of surface parking lots that, like this lot we're talking about, that used to have buildings on them, and then those buildings got knocked down at various points and they just got turned into parking lots. But over the past several years, we've seen a lot of those redeveloped. In the old city, developer Tim Hill is redeveloping a lot right on the corner of Gay Street and Summit Hill. And so that has been the trend, is to kind of reclaim these surface lots for actual development. And as you say, that is probably the last really big, and so there's also a lot just down the street on Church Avenue there, sort of catty corner from the library, but that has just been bought by an out-of-town developer who has plans to put a hotel on it. And so this lot that we're talking about, which is bounded by Gay and Church and Market and Cumberland, may end up being sort of like the last really big blank spot on the downtown map.
Oh, it's at least twice as large as that
Yep.
That lot you're talking that you mentioned there. I mean, it is, you look at downtown Knoxville, and I'm not suggesting that this would be the highest and best use for it or anything. Don't get me wrong. So don't start sending me emails and calling me and yelling at me, folks. But yeah, it's the last block where a tall building, like the Riverview Tower or the Plaza Tower, a tall skyscraper type building could be built, because it's the only one big enough that's without demolition. It is other than the Pryor Brown garage demolition. Let me make sure about that. Don't, again, keep those calls and letters to yourself. I mean, it is there. You can do a lot with that. I mean, it's a whole city block. You can do tons of stuff with it. The potential's unlimited, and it's really puzzling that it's taken this long and still there's nothing going on.
Yep. All right. Well, we certainly will update both of those stories as warranted. All right, let's look ahead to the coming week. Of course, we start with a holiday, Labor Day on Monday. Yep. Hope everybody gets an opportunity to relax and enjoy it. And
rest from your labors.
Rest from your labors, and also maybe give a thought to the labor movement, the United States labor movement that granted us not just that holiday, but things like weekends and 8-hour workdays, at least for those of you who are not self-employed like me and Scott.
Yeah.
Do you remember 8-hour workdays, Scott?
Vaguely. It's kind of like asking me about, do I remember tail fins on cars.
Right.
Or the 5-day work week.
Or the 5-day work week. It's been a little while. Maybe we need a union.
Yeah, well, I've always said that I've got a tyrant for a boss. And that's
exactly. But then there are some things happening in the coming week. The school board will hold its monthly work session and voting meeting. The work session will be on Tuesday instead of Monday when it would normally be because of the holiday. So and then the voting meeting is on Thursday. Both of those meetings start at 5 p.m. in their Summer Place boardroom. Quite a few things on the agenda this month. First of all, they are going to have their own reorganization vote. They will be electing a chair and vice chair, and the current vice chair is Betsy Henderson, and she has expressed an interest in serving as chair. And the current chair, Christy Christie, who has been in that position for 2 years, has said that she would support Henderson. And given that they are both part of the 5-member Republican majority on the school board, that seems like the most likely scenario. Although, as we learned with County Commission last year, we can't take these things for granted. So they will vote on that. They are also going to be talking about a couple of possible steps to take in response to the fairly scathing report that they received in August from the Special Education Task Force that Superintendent John Ryswick appointed. And so there will be more discussion of that. So probably a couple of interesting meetings there for those of you interested in school policy. And then City Council has a meeting on Tuesday.
Yeah, City Council is going to meet on Tuesday. Kind of the centerpiece of this agenda going to be the zoning code amendments proposed by council candidate R. Bentley Marlowe. Alluded to this earlier in the podcast. He initiates one of these citizen initiated changes to the zoning code, which you can do, and it's very rare, but he did it, and he proposed 5 amendments to increase the likelihood of people building what's called missing middle housing, which is duplexes, triplexes, and other small multifamily arrangements, living arrangements, and all. For the most part, you can't build those under the current current code in many zones, and this is all part of a movement that's got a lot of support to increase density through the city to address the housing crisis. But he went through Planning Commission. Planning Commission approved and sent on to city council an amendment to remove the owner occupancy provision of the ordinance that deals with accessory dwelling units. They didn't approve the others. They said, well, let's follow the city's process. The city's been working with the planning staff to come up with proposals on middle housing, and then one they just delayed. So the first one, the ADU, accessory dwelling unit amendment, is on the city council's agenda. They're going to be saying, well, it's first reading. Takes 2 readings. And what it would do would be, like I said, it would be allow people to investor-owned residential properties to build accessory dwelling units, which are carriage houses, pool houses, those kinds of things. Garage apartments, extra dwelling units on your property. But anyway, now you have to be on property where you live. This would allow it to go anywhere, just about anywhere in the city. They're going to have to vote that up or down. The other 3, the ones that the Planning Commission said, let's follow the city and planning staff's process for doing that. We'll get to that in a second. It's a little unclear what exactly they'll be voting. Those have been appealed, so those will be appeals from the Planning Commission decision, and we'll see kind of how that goes. That's completely separate from what the city is going to be doing. The city is going to be proposing to, and not at the city council meeting coming up, they're proposing allowing this middle housing stock to be built in what are known designated traditional neighborhoods in the city, which are basically all the older neighborhoods between I-640 and the Tennessee River. And if you live in one of those neighborhoods, your neighborhood is going to be affected. So it's 4th and Gill, it's West Haven, it's Mechanicsville, it's Morningside, it's all of those neighborhoods would be affected under that. And these are also happen to be neighborhoods where this type of housing already exists, because those neighborhoods were all developed before World War II, which is when after World War II is when more suburban zoning went into effect, and these types of housing units were basically legislated out of existence. So, or out of the realm of possibilities. So, they're going to be proposing that. They'll have open. They're going to have some public meetings, a city council work session. Then it's going to go for Planning Commission in October, which means it'll be November or December before city council gets to those. That's that completely separate thing than Marlowe's proposals. Doesn't even address accessory dwelling units or anything like that. It's not even on the horizon. So Marlowe's ADU amendment will be voted up or down on Tuesday, at least on first reading on Tuesday. That's going to be the big news. It's going to be drown out just about everything else. There are a few other minor things we'll be considering, as they always do, but that'll be the big thing to look forward to next week.
All right. Well, we will be back next week to talk about those things and anything else that gets our attention. For now, we hope you are enjoying your long weekend. And thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber, our producer, here with Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright. And we will talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.